in general, we have been used to be thinking that the body is this kind of thing stacked on top of each other. It's like these columns, and we have these levers and we have these pulleys, and that has been like this old way of viewing the body. So we have been training the body exactly like that, and it becomes a bit of a stiff column where you have pulleys and levers and move like this way.
And the problem is that most people have very limited minds, and their minds can only understand in very like surface level almost anything they do.
Changing the movement training is not only that you change what you do, you really change your mindset. Like you change the way you perceive your body, you change the way you measure your progress.
Most of those things have been around for 50 years, and the people who were doing them 50 years ago are 50 years ahead of the mainstream masses.
If you have been doing animal movements training or movement training in general, there's a very big likelihood that you have done it as a warm-up, or as a kind of supplementary training, or as a form of mobilizing training, or as a form of just something, trying something new or fun. But most likely you haven't done animal movement training as a serious form of strength training. And this, I think, the reason for this is that we still live to a great extent in this world where we measure or where we look at the benefits of an exercise in terms of just the muscle trained. So you do your deadlift and you look at, okay, I'm training the hamstring, I'm training the glutes, I'm training the lats, and that's it. That is the benefit of an exercise. You train these muscles. Then you look at squat. I train the quadriceps, I train the glutes from a bit different angle, I train the calves, and then you measure like, okay, I have basically covered all of the different leg muscles, and now all I need is these two exercises. And this, if we look at the human body and the effects of these exercises in terms of just these isolated muscle areas, this is the case. And then you would ask, like, why would you do a movement training? Because if I look at movement training and I judge it with the same ideas, so for example, a very basic catwalk, it trains the shoulders, it trains the serratus, it trains the abdominal area, it trains hip flexors partially and quadriceps. And then I look, well, I can train those exact same areas with, weightlifting exercises, with dumbbell exercises, barbell exercises. So why would I do the movement training where I can train these same areas with other movements? And those other exercises are good as well. But as I mentioned before, and I'll mention again, is that movement training is more than the sum of its parts. So you cannot sort of see or perceive the benefits of movement training just by looking at the isolated muscle areas or isolated mobility or flexibility of certain areas. You have to look at the body as a whole. And this brings us to the uniqueness of this movement training. What makes it really so unique is that it works really in harmony, or everything, when you're doing this, you're moving the body as a whole. And the fundamental reality of our body is, and this sounds hippie, but it is like, it can be physically even seen nowadays. There's research on the fascia and everything like that. Everything in this body is connected. It doesn't matter how you think about it. It's like spiritual thing or anything. It is like physically, spiritually, in every possible way, the body is connected. Every single point of the body is connected. And strength training the body, bringing the strength into this connectivity of it is, I think, where the uniqueness of our animal movement strength training method really comes into play, because many people do movement training, but they don't necessarily apply the methods that we apply. And for us, it's a systematic way of using a variety of different animal movements with different modalities to develop this strong body. Just like given, an idea of the basic idea of this, our animal movement strength training.
And how we differ also from lots of other people is that if you look at the other people, they are mostly focused on the health and the limberness aspect. They just want to be, more like primal and just want to feel better and like this. And of course, we have the same. But what makes us different is that we are, as Eero and me, we are very competitive and we like performance. We like functionality. We like to have like an edge over our competition in martial arts, in sports and everything else. Like we want to be able to compete, perform and such. And that's why our way of animal movements training, strength training, has evolved to cover this aspect a lot more than what you see on YouTube, for example. And I would like to also add that strength training in general is very domain specific, and it's also very sport specific. So, for example, if you do the deadlifts and squats, you will get good at in that domain. Like you will get good at in that area where you are like standing up and lifting things up. That's like the skill you are developing as a result of those exercises. But what really makes animal movement strength training very special is that you are getting very strong and very athletic and very good at moving on the floor. And not just on the floor, but low on the floor, because some of these even cover like rolling aspects where you're like really touching the floor, but also very low, what we call these low flow elements. So you're really low on the floor. So you will actually build the functionality and performance, athleticism, and movement ability to be able to move freely on the ground in many different like postures and very different angles and all of these things, which is very hard to develop with any other type of training, because like I said, strength is also domain specific and strength specific.
Well, yeah, and well, you could say that also, movement training is specific, like, well, you learn to, or you become best at being on all fours on the ground, like, because we emphasize a lot of that, and, not all sports also use that, but some do. But the fact is that there's a difference also in how, it's not just like what we are doing, it's how we even perceive the body. Like I feel this is one of the major differences, and what also changes how we then use the body. So it's very like straightforward way, the way you perceive your body. So for example, in general, we have been used to be thinking that the body is this kind of thing stacked on top of each other. It's like these columns, and we have these levers and we have these pulleys, and that has been like this old way of viewing the body. So we have been training the body exactly like that, and it becomes a bit of a stiff column where you have pulleys and levers and move like this way. And so that is a mental idea that actually completely changes like how we actually, what we even think is useful to train with the body. And when I start to change my mind on this, and I start to see, okay, this body is actually doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that at all. If it would work like that, our bodies wouldn't be able to handle almost anything. They could not do athletic movements if it was just this kind of columns and pulleys and levers. There would be no like let's say base for a good pliable biomechanically sound movement. It wouldn't exist. And so people do these exercises oftentimes the traditional way is a good way of training again, but it's different type of way. It's this isolation practice, but you make your entire body kind of stiff. You make the body stiff, and then you move your limbs to different directions, or your legs, or you stiffen up these areas. It's always like making some parts of the body this rigid column. In movement training, it's a little bit different, because there is supportive sort of sections in the body and movement sections of the body, but everything is under movement. Everything is moving. And I think this makes it something that transfers to the athleticism, because when you're doing athletic movements, you have this kind of natural pliability present in all of these movements. There's every single time, if you're running or something, you're running or kicking, you're punching, you're always utilizing this kind of mechanics of, let's say, elasticity in your body, and you're never just making yourself this complete like a stiff column. Everything moves in the body and everything adapts in the body, and every tissue, let's say, is responsive in your body. So movement training, the way I see it, it develops this sort of instinctiveness. And going more like in a detailed manner, perhaps to give you an idea of a better idea like of these movements and its benefits, like I already mentioned the catwalk, for example. Just to look at, we can look at with the perspective of just the muscles. So you have your shoulders. Like I mentioned, you have your shoulders, you get serratus, you get some pec minor action. It's because it's supporting, and there's definitely going to be some videos so you can see actually what the catwalk looks like. And then you have your core that is stable, and then you have your legs bent also you're working your quadriceps, the hip flexors are also supporting. You can look at it in these individual muscle sections. But then you can also look at the function of it. And this is where it becomes very important. We start to separate these benefits between these movements, because if I just saying it trains the shoulder, then another movement also trains the shoulder, but the benefits might not be the same because the placement of the shoulder in space can be completely different. In catwalk, it is like directly forward and it moves in about this form of range, right? And then in other movements, we might have it overhead or in extension or something like that. So you get to train all of these different angles, like Samuli explained. So many different aspects of the body gets trained with these movements. And then one of these very kind of like special things that it actually trains, like I mentioned, is the integration. So it's not that you train just this one muscle. You use all of these muscles that I explained throughout this chain. You train all of them to work in congruence together with each other. And this is how they must work. This is how you must learn to use them. And it happens partially instinctively, but in ours, for example, methodology, this is not left by chance, because you could just be moving and still you can, move in a bad manner that can actually even be harmful to an extent. But in our methodology, we emphasize the mindfulness that you apply also with these movements. Mindfulness, and then these modalities like that comes to strength training, like time under tension. You have the distance, and then we have the variability that even within the catwalk, you have just one, way of catwalk oftentimes. But we have a dozen ways that you can vary the catwalk. How you can move the spine in a little bit different manner. And again, it emphasizes different areas. You can move your shoulders a little bit different. You can make longer or shorter strides. You can make it very stiff, very stabilized, or much more flowy, and let's say with much more recoil, these movements. So that's just like on one movement pattern as an example that gives a host of benefits already.
Yeah, it's very holistic. And how I see is that how most people train and how they move is that they train and move in ways that make sense to them. And the problem is that most people have very limited minds, and their minds can only understand in very surface level almost anything they do. And the same applies to strength training as well. Like they can only see the numbers, the weight they can lift, and then they can only see the very limited movement of, curling up the weight in a bicep curl or something like this. And everything else that is outside of their understanding, they naturally want to avoid, because they're like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense to me. Why would I do this? And that's why it's very crucial and very important that people actually try different things. And it especially true for movement training and animal movement strength training, because you don't understand it. Like most people, even if you were to explain it, they wouldn't understand it. They actually have to try it. They have to do it. Then they understand it very well and very clearly what is happening in their body. But without it, you can only talk and talk and talk. But unless you actually try it and do it, then it will always be like some external, a fuzzy thing you try to understand. And the thing is, as human beings, we don't have to understand everything, on a rational level, because the most complicated things, they will still produce benefits and they will still work without needing to rely on the scientific studies or your own understanding. You just need to trust the person who has gotten certain results and knows what he's doing. And then by following his guidance, you can try these different exercises, different movements, and then you will immediately feel the effects if you do them right in the right methods. Because even I sometimes fall victim to this, because I see some movement, maybe I'm not excited to try it, but once I try it, it's like, wow, why I haven't done this for years, because why it took so long to get myself to do it. But once I try it, I feel like, wow, something is happening. I'm feeling the muscle contract and get trained in ways I've never felt before. And after a certain period of time of training, I can really feel that my movement is getting better. And that's actually the most, like the numbers on a screen or on your paper, on your mind, how much you can lift, it doesn't matter actually at all. What matters when it comes to athleticism and functionality is how well you can move. That's like the basis of athleticism. It's your movement ability. And that's where the movement training, animal movement strength training actually produces the best results. They don't produce the best results when it comes to some ego dictated numbers like I can lift this much, because there's nothing to measure. Like you can measure the distance and time you spend on different movement parts. Who cares really? Like what and likewise, but the benefits really transfer to your overall movement capacity and ability, and you can feel it like in anything you do. Like if you do martial arts or sports, like suddenly you are more flexible and more mobile than ever before. You're more stable in different kicks and punches and throws, and when you hit with the bat, suddenly like everything's more stable, everything's more mobile, and everything works in better like congruence and you know, like a holistic, like a make body.
Well, that's a good point of just not thinking about it too much, because that's also, if you think about when I started, I don't know anything about movement training, and I didn't have to know anything about it really. It's like you can only know so much without actually doing and throwing yourself out there. And just like watching a video or something, it will give you very a little idea of actually what is the movement training, what are the effects of it. So rather than, you know, overthinking it or overanalyzing or, you know, or just like confusing yourself with too much information, or even just reading some books or something, or trying to find confirmation, like you said, like you try to find a scientific study of movement training, like what are you doing? Like you are the science experiment. Go and move yourself, move your body, and start to see what it does. And if it doesn't produce results for you, maybe there's a possibility, but I would say that in most of the cases, you will notice an unbelievable effect. And one of the reasons for this is that so few people still do this. Like when we go to the gym here, even I almost never see people do like this animal movement training. Like we go, here's a gym, there's a good outside area, there's a very long like a space where you can push the sleds or run or do your lunges. And a lot of the times when we go there with Samuli, we do like just animal movements like back and forth the entire distance, right? And it's unbelievably effective training, but a lot of people just, they walk or they push the sled and they do the traditional stuff. But they don't really open up to the idea of how many ways there are to move through the space, right? And actually how you could implement these different ways to develop your body in a completely different way, and how you could develop entire new dimensions to your body. And I sometimes talk about this, these surprising effects, is that there are benefits to these movements that I can't even explain sometimes. I cannot perceive, at least in the beginning. So a lot of stuff that movement training might give you benefits that I can't even explain them to you. Like you will go and move, and then you will experience something, and I never even thought about those things. And you are like, whoa, okay, this just happened. You might even fix certain pains in your body that I had no idea about. So there's a lot of benefits that we don't even have an idea about until you actually try them. I think this let's say surprise element of movement training is one of its greatest factors, because we approach often training with a very specific mindset, like I want to train specifically this. And if I give you a movement like a bear walk and I say, okay, it develops hamstring flexibility, develops your hip flexors, develops your shoulder overhead support, I can state these beforehand, like this is what you will get, right? But there's different things that you can develop in your body that I cannot describe even beforehand. So it is an exploration, and that's one of the keys of it, is that there is this openness to different results, and there's openness to your, I'd say, individual adjustment, it gives room for individual. Let's say this individual just joint range of motion, but also individual expression. And if you're doing your weightlifting pattern, this is usually it's so strictly defined how you're supposed to do your exercise, in what kind of pathway. And people often also tell you like this is exactly how it should be done. But the variability, for example, we are promoting the individuality. We're not only like allowing it to happen, but we give methodology and we actually try to reinforce your individual exploration of the exercise. Because that is fundamentally the way that I eventually took my body to the next level. It starts with just doing movements like they are, imitating other people, but eventually there's a process where I start to free up myself more and more, and I explore myself. And there is no scientific study, there's no coach, there's no authority, there's no one really like explaining where to go. And this is where you start to learn to trust more or less your own intuitiveness and your own, let's say, sovereignty as a mover who can trust in his body.
Well, if you look at most like Qigong exercises and Buddhist forms or Qigong forms, or even yoga, or even like, if we go to sports like boxing, hooks and punches and kicks and stuff like this, like it doesn't even make sense to like study some textbook and like because it doesn't, like it feels even stupid even talk about it. Like if you're like a boxer, like some coach would say like, yeah, go study this textbook about throwing hooks and punching jab and like this. It makes no sense because these people know that it doesn't matter. What matters is that actually doing the technique and improving the technique based on the cues you get from the coach who has done it a lot longer than you, who has coached people like you and who knows what is actually happening. Like there are actually lots of like even scientific books about Qigong and yoga and like this, but in my opinion most of it, it's like, maybe it's not nonsense, but it just makes no sense to even understand the actual like why it's so superb and effective. Because if you actually try yoga or like Qigong exercises or animal movement strength training or movement training or do any sport, you will know how it feels and how it works and stuff like this, because you get it from the experience. But how is it in the fitness industry right now is that everyone is actually sheep, because they just do what everyone else is doing. And for example, for years and years we have been saying like do hip flexor training, like train the hip flexors in like different ways. And only now when some other guys start to do hip flexor training and suddenly everyone is doing hip flexor training, and then only 10 people like, oh, okay, maybe I should do this too. But without it, they don't, like most people don't do anything. They just, only follow the mass and go with the flow.
Like whatever becomes mainstream, then you start to follow. Even though in the past it could have been like, well, this is like dangerous, you should maybe do this. Then once it becomes like everyone is doing, now it's safe.
Then it's safe and then it's effective. But most of those things have been around for 50 years. And the people who were doing them 50 years ago are 50 years ahead of the mainstream masses. Like the same goes with breathing exercises as well. Like only now in the last 5 to 10 years, breathing exercises have become immensely popular. But these have been around for thousands of years. And even in the West, they have been around since 1950s or something like this. Or even the old school bodybuilders used to do some vacuum.
Yes, yeah.
Like they have been around, but it just hasn't been popular. But they have always worked, and maybe even better than right now, because they had better like understanding, and it has been always around. But only now when everyone is doing, then we do it. But we should not think like this, because that's the way to be behind everyone else. Because if you want to get ahead, if you want to be, and if you want to actually do what is the best, then you do, even if it's not popular or even if it's not what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, but that's the difficulty of it. Like how do you build the courage to even try things that you don't see? And this is why I think actually I would say, like you mentioned the books, well, it depends on the book really, but books can give ideas, like, you know, someone talking, or if you read a book, it may influence your mind. You still cannot take any like knowledge from the book directly without verifying it in your body. Like, it is not useful unless you combine it with the bodily knowledge. You have to embody that knowledge. But books can be useful if you know how to then, or if you try to apply the idea that you get from it. Because like I mentioned already in the beginning, we used to think like, and especially in the physiotherapy and training world, like our bodies were this kind of like stiff, stacked, you know, columns or whatever, boxes on top of each other. This was the idea. And I think it clearly changed the way people, or the way personal trainers trained and the way they train their clients. And it has transformed an entire culture of people, of the way, how they perceive their bodies. Because when we publish training material or we post videos, there's still people, a lot of people who have clearly like this ingrained fear in them, like on training, natural movement of their bodies. They're being conditioned to really be extremely fearful about their body, and the reaction they have is very emotional. Even it is like, it is like they come and point like fingers, like this is horrible, this is like atrocity, like something horrible is happening here. You know, when in reality there's like, for me as a person who is intuitive with his body, my movements are, they're very neutral. There's nothing like specifically dangerous about this or that. It just, I'm just moving my body. It's very neutral. But for other people, it wakes up this strong emotion then in themselves. And this is, you know, related to the teachings, I think, in the general culture. Like it's not only that people follow the mainstream, but the mainstream is also often completely wrong. It's like the mainstream knowledge can be completely detrimental. It can even be like something that harms you in the long run. And it tells you that it's protecting you. But I believe that in many cases, these people who are restricting their movements, and they get these ideas that you shouldn't move this way, you shouldn't bounce this, or for example, during stretching, or there's so many limitations that you get into your head. And these are extremely dangerous because, and I'm talking actually from my own experience, because there's been many times when I had some issue with my body, an issue or maybe some pain or just some tightness didn't open up, something like this. And the answer would have been very simple. The answer would have been like right there for me to try and do, but I didn't do it because my mind was conditioned to look past this option, because that was not allowed, like there was not a way to actually move. It was like I was made to believe that it's useless or dangerous, or just you could ignore it. And same, you know, if we go even relate this back to movement training, there isn't, I mean, nowadays movement training is considered generally safe and everything, but there's still the usefulness of it. It's not, it hasn't gotten the kind of lift, I would say, or the popularity that it maybe should have. It is not still in the mainstream like we talk about. Yeah,
this actually reminds me of the fact that only like 50 or 60 years ago, doctors were still prescribing like cigarettes for different things, and cigarettes were considered like healthy. And this also reminds me of the fact that, let's say 20 years ago, all this meditation stuff, all these affirmations, praying, all these breathing exercises, all these qigong and yoga, they were considered like pseudoscience and like nonsense. But now, after they have gotten some studies and people have realized it actually works and it has become mainstream, now everyone is like, yeah, this is the truth. But let's not forget that 60 years ago, everyone was smoking cigarettes and it was like a healthy thing. And likewise, 20 years ago, most things people right now think are actually the best things you can do. 20 years ago, everyone was thinking they are like nonsense. So that's very important.
Yep, like, and I think that brings out the importance of really trusting yourself in these matters, because it's like, a lot of the way I see our progress over the years, like one of the biggest thing has been that we've been able to trust ourselves, and we have been able to like look past the conditioning, and that has been an incredibly, and it didn't happen like in overnight like that, which just like everything was out of the brain, but it happened gradually through constantly searching and exploring. And this exploration was important because that actually showed me that when I was doing these movements that I didn't have to be afraid. Like I didn't have to be constantly worried about some weird like compression forces in my spine. Like these were just words that were thrown around, but when it came to the reality of the body, there was nothing there. There was nothing to be scared. Like that's the literal, that is the hardest thing. Like now, if you are scared of some movement stuff, like it's quite possible there's absolutely almost nothing that you should be worried about in trying these kind of different movements. So that is, I think, fundamental. Just explore these movements, and the movement training is a vehicle. Like movement training in the realm of this physical development is kind of a vehicle to start experimenting with movements, and I think gain a lot of trust into your natural abilities, because as I mentioned also before many times, that it just doesn't have the same rules. And some people try to bring a lot of restrictive rules even in the movement training, but we have managed to keep our methodology, I think, away from things, especially in the animal movement strength training. Even though it's like strength training, it is the methodology is different compared to regular training. One of the uniqueness is the variability. Like I mentioned, we give a lot of freedom to the individual, and we encourage the exploration during the movement, because one of the things is also that any teacher, even though you should learn from teachers who who've used their bodies for many years, like you mentioned, these boxing teachers and everything, if they have an amazing movement, you should probably follow what they're doing. Like you should listen to these people. But there's a limit to what any teacher can teach you. Same with even like Grandmaster Jiang Yushan. Like there's a limit to what he can teach you and show you, because it all happens through yourself. So this is why your body is like the ultimate teacher, and it's a matter of, I think, tapping into the body and removing the blockages that can be your mind that keep you from learning from the most important teacher. Because this is what we've been getting here. I think what you also Samuel mentioned at the beginning here, was that you don't need to know all this stuff. You don't need to know something about scientific or exact things. You don't need to know any of that. And you could learn from your body. And we have learned an enormous amount of our bodies, but you cannot learn from the body if you have been, if you're like strongly conditioned, you're filled with these limiting beliefs, limiting ideas, and limiting paradigms of how the body functions and what it can even take. So I have a question for you. If there's like a person who has never done this before and who has the courage and like the interest to start this, how would they start doing this movement training and animal movement strength training? Like what are the basic movements they should focus on first? Right. Well, you can do, of course, some research, and you will find probably maybe usually like 3 maybe basic movements. And this is what we often bring out in a lot of our videos. We have already what I mentioned. We have the catwalk. That is one of the most fundamental patterns of moving on all fours on the ground. Second is the bear walk. So the catwalk is where your back is more horizontal. Bear walk, you have an arch in your back. It's more like parabolic structure, right? Your shoulders are more overhead and your hips are up. So you have the horizontal, and then you have more this like curved position moving on all fours. And then we have something that turns it a little bit upside down. We have the crab walk. So we have the cat, the bear, and the crab. Those 3 are, I think, some of the fundamentals that you should be, or you can start with, because they are something that everyone can learn. They don't have a strong, they don't have a very high requirement for any kind of specific strength. So actually you can be pretty much out of shape, and you can be even overweight, and you're gonna have a hard time doing them, but it's not impossible to do them. So I think those are probably 3 that you start with. And if to add anything else, I would say monkey walk is of course also something you can do. So there will be 4 different movements.
Bear crab roll.
Well, bear crab roll, yeah, that's actually fundamental transition. You could add that there. So you have the cat and you have the bear, and then there's a transition between them. And actually, that was a really good addition, because it's funny that I've been doing bear crab roll for so long time, and it's like it's second nature to me. And I perceive it as a simple movement, and that is completely wrong. It's not it's not simple at all, based on what I've seen, for example, with my clients that I trained online. These people, I think I'm giving them a simple movement. You go from the cat to the bear. You go from the bear to the crab, and they have enormous difficulties in performing this movement. So that is already very descriptive of how the movement training can really challenge and train your coordination.
And it's a very simple movement, but it still develops lots of coordination.
Very simple, but it's not. Like it is, but it's not. Like you can do it physically. You will have all the attributes. You will have the strength to do it. Definitely you will have all the strength to do it, but you just don't have your nervous system and the brain properly to do it. And it is still difficult. It will, like people who try them and they do it slowly, and because they're completely lost with coordination, they're often like shaking. Their body's like shaking because they're supporting with one arm, for example. They've never necessarily supported themselves with one arm. You're supported with one arm, and in bear crab roll, your arm goes like in this like there's a circle. So you have to support.
3D motion.
Yeah, 3D motion. That you have to support. So yes, that transitional element. So you have catwalk, bear walk, crab walk, and monkey walk, and then you have the transition between the bear and the crab. So
and then if you implement the variability method of movement 20xx, then you have like hundreds of different variations of these movements.
Yep.
And that's how it gets interesting, because you can actually target different parts of the body and different muscles with like different changes to these movements.
Yes.
And what's also good is that the movements also work on different planes of the body. For example, the crab walk, you have the back against the floor. So it trains the body very differently, and you will develop the supportive strength to be in this position and move in this position. So your arms, like triceps, actually grow very strong. And also you develop the lats and the scapula muscles to keep the scapula and the shoulders depressed, and likewise.
Mm-hmm. I think a very good example of just you mentioned variability, for example, I mentioned the catwalk and the bear walk. So if I change the catwalk a little bit, because traditionally that I teach it like let's say there's like a first variation that you can start. It's quite stiff. It's because the purpose is to practice a bit of like stabilizing, really, keeping a rigid core that doesn't drop. So you're actually training anti-rotation from your core, anti-extension support from your core, and then you're just like moving a bit like this way. But a very easy way to vary this movement is to make it into this kind of cheetah walk, which is kind of just a variation of a catwalk. And in cheetah, it's totally different, because you're no longer just going stiff. You can start to use this, for example, your scapulas in a completely different manner. Suddenly your scapulas move in 3D pattern. Instead of stabilizing this way, like stabilizing, say, stiff stability, you get dynamic stability like so. And same way, your core is a little bit more movement and limberness. And the exercises changes completely. But if you look at it from kind of, you take a still shot of it, it's quite similar. There's like, you're still in the same posture, moving like this way, back horizontal, but entirely different effect on the tissues that you're developing. And same way in the bear walk, because we have in Movement 20X workshop, we have bear walk and we have gorilla walk separately, but they are the same fundamental position. So your hips are up, your shoulders are more like overhead. But in bear walk, it's just, again, it's like a stiffer version. It's kind of like the catwalk. And if you do the gorilla walk, the difference is that I start to move in a very pliable manner. Suddenly I'm, rolling the shoulders and everything. And I have a totally different feel of the movement. My scapula, it's amazing, like almost like this massage, like circular movement pattern for the shoulder. And again, same movement pattern. So, or same fundamental basic starting position for it. But totally changes the
yeah, and if you want to train the legs are one of the easiest muscle groups to train, with these movements. Like you can walk low on the ground, it's like duck walk, or you can jump with the bunny hops. It trains the legs amazingly well. Like my legs have never been more sore and more trained after these exercises. And likewise, the big foot walk is also amazing because you are on the 50, like the halfway way in the squat, and then you're just walking and you're like balancing from one leg to another. So it's like a unilateral exercise, but it trains the both legs at the same time, but just in different muscle lengths in different periods of the exercise. So these work very well, but then there are like a group of different exercises to even develop the back, the hamstrings, and the flexibility and the mobility, which we cannot even cover here because they are part of the movement with exercise method and they take more time to explain. But there's like dozens of exercises you can actually develop the legs in very versatile and comprehensive ways. And then if you want to train the pressing strength, like nothing comes too close to the lizard crawl or the Komodo walk. Like these train the chest and triceps as much as anything can train, like as well as bench press or push-ups or anything. But there's just more dynamic and more like versatile movements where you're actually training the muscle in more muscle lengths and more positions than you would normally in like a push-up. It's basically like, even the lizard crawl is like, it's the same if you were to do like 5 different push-up variations or more.
Well, yeah, the lizard crawl is, it's funny because you have, again, it's, I think one of the effectiveness of it is based on that you can vary it a lot. Like, you know, there was usually the one lizard crawl variation that you see popularized, and we have like, I don't know, maybe we have like 30 different, or I think we might have like 30 different lizard claw variations that we have developed. And this truly, like, you can get, you get in an enormous amount of angles where your shoulders and your chest and your scapular stabilizers will get engaged and activated. But in Movement to Next, we cover Komodo walk and the lizard crawl and the many different pressing exercises that actually prepare you for it, because this is an advanced movement, but it's nothing impossible. There are multiple people who have achieved, you know, they've like demonstrated a very like perfect looking controlled lizard crawl, and I've been just super impressed by a lot of people who've been able to actually achieve this, because it is still a challenging movement. But the lizard crawl, I think, is an interesting that it develops this bent arm strength, that because in most cases in push-up you're always having this motion. In lizard crawl you're staying low, so you have this kind of, you're actually extending to the front and then you move your arm in this kind of pattern. So in general, push-ups would train usually just your shoulder like this way, but in lizard crawl actually the shoulder goes overhead in certain points of the range of motion, which creates very, again, unique stimulus. And this can be felt very strongly in the serratus, even in your latissimus, because holding it here, if you to hold your arm in this way and stabilize your body weight, it requires your back muscles to actually work. And then you transfer it in through adduction here. And this entire time your shoulders and your triceps have to also constantly work. So that's just one an example of how like mechanically complex and versatile these movements can be, as opposed to just doing like movement like this way. It's the angles are something that you wouldn't even think about. This, again, I said, like, you will encounter things during movement that you cannot even think before you actually do them. And another thing comes to the core development that I like. You know, like I mentioned, catwalk, we have this horizontal plane where it is very stabilized, and then you have the bear where the back is actually rounded, and then you have the crab walk where with every step you, like you said, you have your back against the floor. But with every step that you take, if you, for example, watch, or if you have a six-pack and visible abdominals, if you follow your core muscles and you're taking steps, they are in a very interesting manner contracting the entire core, like the upper abdominals. And with every step, there's also the anti-rotation there. So every different position and posture where you're doing these movements, it trains the abdominals in a different way. It is not like it trains the core, and when you, in other exercise, it trains the core, and there's no difference. It trains it differently. Lizard crawl, you have this kind of motion with the core. So, I mean, if you think about, like, this is your core, this here is your belly button, this is your backside. And there's this kind of rotation constantly. The core is relatively stiff, but this is how it moves. So you have to support in these diagonal positions your core while you're taking these steps. In addition to, for example, lizard crawl training, your external rotation, your glutes, your hip rotation when you're moving forward. So, but this is not, like I said, this isn't one of the fundamentals you would start with. Like if you're interested in trying movement training.
Yeah, it's actually very simple. Like how it starts is very simple and you just focus on simple movements and simple exercises. Yes. It's not complicated at all. It's more simple than what people make some push-up exercises to be or something else. Like there's less rules actually. You just move the body and that's it. But like you said, like for core development, it's one of the best ways. Like you don't even have to do crunches or sit-ups because and it's more athletic and more versatile training for your core. So it actually transfers better to all functional purposes and like this. And it's also good because it's like really trains the spine in very natural patterns. So you can get rid of back pain and hip pain and all this kind of ailments in the body just by learning how to move the body in very fluid and natural ways. But it's good to understand that me and Eero, like, we have been very open-minded about training, and we started with like training that was mostly powerlifting and bodybuilding and calisthenics, street workout and gymnastics, and we focused on these style forms of training for many years. And we have talked about this in the past a lot, how it destroyed our body, and it didn't give much transfer to athleticism or functionality at all. So we are not actually married to any forms of training. Like we use what works the best. And right now, there's a reason why our training is structured this way. Like nowadays we focus on the maze and the club bells and movement training, but also like the athletic training, which is more traditional, but with the mind control focus and so on. But the whole point is that we are not married to any form of training. We just use what works the best and what produces the best results. And we don't care about what anyone else thinks or what is the mainstream consensus of what is the best, because we just try to find the best way to develop the body and get the best results.
Like somebody mentioned that our background of calisthenics and everything is you cannot also separate that even from the mindset that was applied, and it was a rigid mindset. It was a rigid mindset and it was focused on numbers. Like I want to do 20 pull-ups. I want to do like 50 kilo extra pull-up or a dip or something. This was a very rigid mindset, and the way we measured our progress was also limited because of these numbers. And changing the movement training is not only that you change what you do, you really change your mindset. Like you change the way you perceive your body, you change the way you measure your progress, and you change entirely the way you're actually capable of even moving your body. So it's very holistic change, and as opposed to just changing like an exercise. This is not it. You're changing your entire what is this, like this realm. You're changing an entire realm of training, and the framework. Actually, you're changing the framework behind your training. This, I would say, you will transform it and revolutionize it. And I think this is the idea that really then also travels. The way you think about it travels into your body, and the way you move your body will directly change also how you feel about it and your functionalism and everything that is related to it. So it's really a holistic change and transformation that you can experience.